July 5th, a new Pokemon was discovered deep in the jungle. July 10th, we decided to christen the newly discovered Pokemon Mew. February 6th, Mew gave birth. We've named the newborn Pokemon Mewtwo. September the 1st, Mewtwo is far too powerful. We have failed to curb its vicious tendencies. April 15th, Mewtwo has resurfaced, and its power has only increased over the years. There is now nothing that can stop this beast's destructive onslaught. Mewtwo has returned to Smash Brothers. Mewtwo! Mewtwo, the genetic Pokemon, number 150, and the most powerful Pokemon of all. This beloved Pokemon icon has finally seen a return to Smash Brothers after a 13-year-long wait, aging like a fine wine and becoming a much better character overall, thanks to many buffs, hitbox improvements, and more. He may have missed the initial roster when Smash 4 initially launched, but his inclusion is still welcomed by many fans and players alike. Mewtwo opened to, surprisingly, mixed responses from the general public. Tier whoring aside, many players were expecting Mewtwo to have changed from his overall floaty self, and were disappointed to see that he was still a defensive character with a really lightweight style. And then it came about. The discussion that Mewtwo was really bad, garbage tier, not worth anyone's time. Even after all the changes done to him, it apparently wasn't enough. Well, unlike the whiny masses, I say different. I personally think Mewtwo is fantastic, but his really high learning curve turns players off from actually trying him. But that's just my opinion. And instead of analyzing opinions, what about putting the facts out in the open and truly seeing whether or not he's a good character? On that note, I'm once again FeliciaFan444, and I welcome you back to Underbrawl Episode 3, the third episode in a series of competitive guides that looks into characters that are deemed subpar by the general public. This episode will delve into Mewtwo, dissecting all of his strongest abilities, useful strategies, and more. Mewtwo is a fan favorite, so I'm hoping that I can do this character justice. With that, let's get right into it with the standard introduction segment of Underbrawl, discussing a character's playstyle and useful tools. Mewtwo, as a character, is what's known as a glass cannon, or a character that can deal incredible amounts of damage, but doesn't have much health as a result. His attacks are all decently fast and hard, with most having great range and little cooldown. But due to his mobility, Mewtwo is unlike most glass cannon fighters. Mewtwo is very floaty, so he can't rush in that fast to deal damage. This may seem like a problem, but this actually gives Mewtwo one of his greatest strengths, that is, oddly enough, very befitting of a psychic type. Mewtwo's greatest strength is mind games, messing with opponents through long-range pokes with its tail, covering range with projectiles and reflector, and punishing anyone who likes to get close with a hindering move. Mewtwo's kit greatly benefits this kind of playstyle, and even though he's still very light, it hasn't stopped him or other characters in his weight class from being fantastic fighters. The first of Mewtwo's useful tools is his down tilt, a very quick tail swipe along the ground that has very minimal lag, much like Lil Mac's down tilt. His attack is Mewtwo's greatest combo starter. It has a lot of nasty follow-ups that can rack up damage really quickly. His attack can work with neutral air, forward air, standard B, side smash, and up smash, all of which are better at different percents, as unlike Lil Mac, this attack will knock the opponent quite high into the air at percents higher than 130. This means that even though it has amazing combo potential, there's only a certain window in which the combos are actually possible. Make sure you're hitting the opponent with the middle part or the base part of the tail as opposed to the tip. The tip has a different hitbox that tends to knock opponents away rather than up into the air. Next in Mewtwo's arsenal of useful tools is his forward tilt, a long-reaching tail attack that is made for spacing the opponent away from you. His attack is decently strong, and will hit for even more damage if your opponent is closer to you, but its point isn't to deal damage, it's to keep the boundary between Mewtwo and his foe maintained. If your opponent gets too close, using this attack into standard B is a good way of telling them to back off. One of Mewtwo's smaller but also useful tools is his up tilt, a long-reaching tail swipe that goes in a wide arc up into the air, knocking opponents off the ground, but not by much. This attack is made to set up further attacks, but the hitbox works differently on different sized characters, usually working on smaller and wider characters better, such as Kirby, Mana, and Wario. Characters like Lucina, Shulk, and other humanoid characters of large to medium size tend to get knocked up higher than others, and therefore make the setup useless. This is why this attack is a minor tool as opposed to a major one. The main use of the up tilt is setting up for Mewtwo's next tool, Mewtwo's Up Smash, an incredibly powerful smash attack with a high hitbox that can punish airborne opponents and kill at rather low percents. The rather odd part of this attack is that some characters can actually get knocked out earlier, as the startup hitbox is rather odd in proportion. To make up for this, use up tilt to knock opponents over your head and then smash them up with an up smash. While I said the up tilt isn't the most reliable on all characters, it's usually only the small characters that can dodge the initial startup hit. The next of Mewtwo's kit to cover is its incredibly powerful forward smash, a powerful psychic blast that has a stronger hitbox near the edge of the attack. It can KO at decently low percents. Its attack's range has been slightly reduced from melee, but in return receive more KO power. Its attack is a powerful punish out of shield or out of down B stun, and can usually result in an easy victory if you pull off the latter late in a match. Next up is Mewtwo's Down Smash, a single-sided down smash attack that has a ton of launch power. Since this attack is only one-sided, it doesn't provide Mewtwo with side coverage from roll-happy players, but it can still punish rollers. You can also hit this attack out of down tilt if your opponents are slow to react, as well as after a down B stun for an easy KO. If the down smash isn't doing it for you when it comes to coverage, using forward smash adjacent to you also works. While its attack has some of the least amount of damage when it comes to Mewtwo's smash attacks, it has some of the best KO power. Next up is Mewtwo's Aerials, and the first of his useful aerials is his Neutral Air, better known as Mewtwo's neutral game tool. This attack is a rapid hitting psychic shock that can catch opponents and rack up an easy 12% if they're caught in the attack. Using this attack against pressuring opponents out of short hop is an easy way to get some decent damage, and it's not too hard to actually follow up with other attacks once you land, as this attack's landing lag isn't that bad. One thing to remember about the neutral air is the fact that opponents can be either knocked in front of you or behind you depending on when they get locked into the attack. If they're close to the front of Mewtwo, they could launch forward, but if they're caught overhead or close to Mewtwo's middle or back, it'll launch the opponent behind Mewtwo. Back launch follow-ups aren't possible with this attack, so use this opportunity to build a projectile charge or get farther away from your opponent. The next aerial to talk about is probably Mewtwo's most useful aerial overall, the forward air, or Shadow Claw, as fans have dubbed it. Strangely enough, Mewtwo can't actually learn Shadow Claw. Anyways, this attack is a wide hook-like slash attack that has a ton of knockback and does pretty good damage. This attack is one of Mewtwo's strongest KO moves, usually KOing opponents at around 100% and even earlier for lighter characters. This attack's hitbox is decently large and can be used with float jumping to float up and catch the opponent in midair to deal an easy KO. This attack is also really useful out of down tilt or short hop, as its quick startup can catch opponents off guard. If you're lucky, you can actually link two forward aerials together at really low percent after a down tilt pop, but usually only works on wider characters. The next of Mewtwo's useful aerials is an attack that was once seen as mostly useless, his back air. Mewtwo's back air is a tail attack hitting in a wide arc, which is actually not that powerful for a back air. However, while it's not that powerful, its hitbox is quite large, and is Mewtwo's best edge guarding tool. Mewtwo can easily float jump off screen and whack opponents with his back air and teleport back onto the stage. This actually having the ability to KO opponents at decent percent if you catch them close to the edge of the screen, unlike his melee counterpart that could barely do anything with his back air at all. The last of Mewtwo's tools is his down air, arguably one of the fastest meteor smash attacks in the entire game, if not the fastest. While most meteor smashers have a small startup time that makes them quite tricky to time and pull off, Mewtwo's meteor smash comes out almost instantly, making this one of Mewtwo's greatest KO tools if used properly. To make up for its incredible speed, the hitbox to meteor smash opponents is a bit smaller than others, and setting this attack at an odd angle will actually knock the opponent upward as opposed to smashing them downwards. With that, you now know all of Mewtwo's strongest abilities, all of which benefit Mewtwo's defensive playstyle. However, as you might have noticed, there are several attacks that I've actually yet to cover, namely Mewtwo's special attacks. Due to the fact that Mewtwo's special attacks play such an integral role in his playstyle, I only see it right that these attacks are all covered in their own section, as to not jumble them up with Mewtwo's physical tools. With that said, let's move on to just that, a rundown on Mewtwo's very useful special attacks. Mewtwo is a character that can heavily benefit from the use of his special attacks, all of which cover a lot of common weaknesses that characters tend to have in Smash. The three main specials in question, Shadow Ball, Confusion, and Disable, are all designed to heavily punish several types of playstyles, including Reckless Rushdown, Projectile Spam, and Defensive Keep Away. The last of which was Mewtwo's greatest weakness in Melee. Mewtwo's specials may sound like something quite wimpy for a Pokemon as powerful and destructive as Mewtwo, but the overall priority and usability makes those thoughts a fleeting memory. With that, let's get started with Mewtwo's first major special move, Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball is Mewtwo's standard B, an incredibly powerful projectile that can be charged and stored much like Lucario's Aura Sphere or Samus's Charge Shot. However, unlike the other two, Mewtwo's projectile is designed to be that of a priority projectile, which means that this attack will continue to fly through the air and completely ignore smaller projectiles like 06 Samus's Paralyzer Shot or Mario's Fireball. This projectile is also, surprisingly, very fast, traveling a bit faster than that of Samus's Charge Shot or Lucario's Aura Sphere respectively, and reaching a maximum length of a Final Destination stage. So it's almost guaranteed to reach the length of a stage in any serious match. Confusion is a multi-use reflector that can reflect projectiles, juggle opponents, and more. And it took until Smash 4 for this attack to truly become useful. In Melee, this attack didn't exactly reflect projectiles, but instead deflected them. What this means is that this attack did send the attack back at the opponent, but the hitbox wasn't changed as the attack still counted as the opponent's and not yours. This attack was considered a useless attack, but here in Smash 4, it's finally fully usable. This attack will send projectiles straight back at opponents with 1.5 times the amount of power, and has a long-lasting hitbox. But the startup is rather slow, so use this attack in advance if a projectile is coming your way. When not being used to reflect projectiles, this attack can catch and juggle around opponents before dropping them to the ground. While this sounds useless, you can follow up with many different attacks, namely Mewtwo's forward or down smash. While this sounds like an easy follow-up to deal incredible damage and land easy KOs, opponents can actually jump out of this attack after a tumbling animation finishes. If your opponent jumps out of the attack, it's best to get away from your opponent and charge your projectile if you don't have it charged yet. If your opponent magically doesn't tech out of this attack, punish them for it. Disable is, from a first glance, an attack with little to no use, terrible range, and just a waste of a special move slot in general. However, when you delve into it, this attack is designed to shut down any kind of reckless rushdown by a KO-thirsty opponent. This attack is a super short-range stun attack that will lock the opponent into a stun state if it connects, which will last longer depending on how much damage the opponent has. This attack only works on opponents that are looking at Mewtwo, and compared to Melee, this attack has seen an incredible range increase. If you hit your opponent with this and they're around 80%, they're almost guaranteed to be KO'd, thanks to the fact that you can easily fully charge a smash attack and KO them with little to no effort. With this attack, opponents are forced to play a spacious and cautious game against Mewtwo to not risk getting stun locked into a possibly easy KO. While it may not look like it thanks to the fact that it's such a short range attack, this attack does count as a projectile. Since this attack does count as a projectile, opponents with reflectors can actually use the reflectors to send the attack right back at Mewtwo. With this, Mewtwo players need to plan their attack patterns properly when against this kind of opponent, as overzealous use of Disable can usually result in an easy punish against yourself. With these specials, Mewtwo has a ton of tools made for defensive survival, which is most likely why he's such a light character, as a heavier character with the amount of tools Mewtwo has would most likely be way too OP. It's like Seth in Street Fighter. He takes extra damage because of his incredible versatility and impeccable offensive capability. Speaking of Mewtwo's weight, this is one of the main reasons most people consider him a bad character, as his overall weight makes playing him a task of survival and punishment. And while that may be true, it doesn't make him a bad character. To counteract these lightweight thoughts, I'm going to pass on a few tips on Mewtwo survival that keeps the Psychic Glass Cannon in the fight much longer than usual. Mewtwo is one of the lightest characters in the game, matching the same weight as Rosalina and Luma, and with light characters comes the overall need to survive. These characters are incredibly susceptible to easy KO attacks and percents way below what would normally kill the rest of the cast. And since this is the case, most players need to adapt to their opponent's playstyle and play around it from a safe distance. And Mewtwo is certainly no exception to this need to adapt playstyle. Mewtwo may only be around 3 months old, but that doesn't stop players like myself from picking up a few tips and tricks on how to keep everyone's favorite psychic powerhouse alive longer than normal. These aren't official strategies made by Mewtwo players that I adopted, these are rather things I just adapted to and learned myself over my time while playing Mewtwo. Let's get this started.
Tip number 1. Slow start. When not trying to reference a terrible ability used by a subpar legendary Pokemon, what this means is starting a match incredibly safe and slow, not going after the opponent, and either taking the time to predict an oncoming attack or charge a Shadow Ball. Play safe with pokes from forward tilt or down tilt until you can determine the kind of player you're playing against. Once you have an idea what you're up against, go to work on them. If they're a zone controller, punish them with confusion and combo out of down tilt into easy forward airs and possible up smashes. If they're a rushdown player, take shots with neutral jab into down tilt combos and unleash disable when the opportunity arises. And if they're a Toon Link, just flat out kill them and don't feel any remorse about it. This kind of start benefits Mewtwo's mind game playstyle and makes you learn how your opponent plays to perform to the best of your ability. If you learn your opponent's movements and patterns, it's much easier to read and punish, which is what Mewtwo is all about. Just remember to not rush down with Mewtwo, because even though he has combos that are inescapable, he's still much better played as a defensive punisher. Tip number 2. Recoil retreat. Shadow Ball to victory. As mentioned earlier, Mewtwo's Shadow Ball special has a ton of recoil on it, meaning that it will launch Mewtwo backwards as he launches the projectile forward. This may sound awful at first, but then you realize that this makes Shadow Ball much more than your standard charge projectile and can make it one of the best escape tools for Mewtwo. Mewtwo can sometimes suffer when certain characters, like Pikachu or Sheik, gets in with reckless rushdown and he can't properly counter their onslaught. With this, you need to create some distance between you and your opponent, and if you have a fully charged Shadow Ball, you have just that. Simply launching your Shadow Ball out of your first or second jump can give you a bit of breathing room, as opponents that are thirsty enough to chase after you will more likely take the blunt of the Shadow Ball's damage, or take a ton of shield damage as this attack isn't safe on shield. Mewtwo is launched backwards faster than the Shadow Ball is launched forwards, so he's technically safe as he'll most likely fall under the Shadow Ball's trajectory if the initial attack is reflected. Of course, opponents can always dodge the projectile and continue pursuing you, but Mewtwo is capable of acting out of launch as he hits the ground, which is why this technique isn't only good for getting away from opponents, but is also good for advancing on opponents as well. Using the Shadow Ball in the direction adjacent to you, you can quickly dash in on the opponent and get a quick hit on them, usually allowing for a quick forward tilt, down tilt, or even a forward smash that may result in an easy KO. The thing to keep in mind here is that you have to sacrifice a fully charged Shadow Ball in order to make the strategy work, and that can be worth it if you're facing an opponent that's hard to approach. Try to use this ability sparingly, as after multiple uses, opponents will more than likely be able to read your advanced pattern and punish you for it. Tip number 3. Short Hop Shock. Catch, space, and protect. Since most opponents need to get in really close to fight Mewtwo effectively, creating some safety bubbles between you and your opponent is more than recommended when they're on the offensive, and thankfully Mewtwo has just that with his neutral air. Using neutral air out of short hop is an effective way of racking up damage and creating safety bubbles, as his attack can catch opponents and lock them in before throwing them away. His attack can also be followed up into more short hop aerials right after the neutral lands if their percent is low enough or if the opponent is one of the heavier characters in the game. Short hop neutral air can be comboed into short hop forward air, dash attack, and more, but even more follow-ups are possible if you fast fall the neutral air. If you fast fall the neutral air, Mewtwo will hit the ground before he can get up the initial launching hit on his neutral air, and in return, follow up with another attack in its place. You can let out a forward tilt to space out opponents even more and give out more damage than the standard neutral air. But the biggest reason that this is one of the best follow-up options is that your opponents can still fall behind you, and the instant direction change of your side tilt or side smash is incredibly useful if that happens. With these 3 simple tips, you can improve your survivability with Mewtwo, and probably even improve your Mewtwo game offensively through proper timing. Mewtwo, as a character, is still fairly new to the general public, and I'm sure that there's more to him than these 3 simple tips. But this is just my personal list of tips, and I'll be sure to add more if Mewtwo ever gets buffed in the future. Next, let's move on to a couple of extra things you should utilize when playing as Mewtwo. Mewtwo, as a character, is quite intricate in the way his overall moveset can be played, and can utilize some interesting mechanics in order to mix up and confuse his opponents, giving him a much better chance of not only surviving, but actually winning. Mewtwo has some decently standard combos that can't be broken out of, like his neutral jab into down tilt into jump cancel up smash, but these are things a Mewtwo player should know before actually using him in an actual fight. This section is for tips and tricks that many Mewtwo players don't take advantage of, and are incredibly strong abilities that Mewtwo can benefit from in literally any kind of match. Tip number 1. Ascension Aerials. Mewtwo's unique float jump allows for Mewtwo to continue ascending into the air while launching out an aerial attack. This kind of ability is very useful for finishing off stocks, pressuring opponents that like to stay in the air, and overall just being an incredibly unpredictable pain. The most useful aerials to use while using this float jump technique are neutral air and forward air, although the float jump back air is still a strong edgeguard tool, and float jump down air can certainly help Mewtwo get into a position for an easy dunk. Neutral air ascension can catch and launch opponents like short hop neutral air, but the fact you're in the air can lead to a confusion to boost yourself forward into a possible forward air follow-up. Lastly, there's jump cancel disabling, or just jump canceling in general. Mewtwo's float jump is useful for setting up high recovery punishes, but it can also be cancelled into Mewtwo's special attacks, the most useful cancel being a short hop cancel into Disable. Since Mewtwo is easily susceptible to low percent KOs in the air, opponents will most likely try to pressure Mewtwo and getting close as he tries jumping into the air. Cancelling your momentum into Disable will catch opponents into it in a daze and possibly lead to a free punish. Even if Mewtwo is using his attack while off the ground, it will stun opponents if they're grounded, and if the opponent is in the air, Mewtwo can pursue with a confusion boost and pull off a possible forward air, or land and lash out a forward tilt or forward smash. These 2 tips are pretty straightforward and easy to learn, but decently hard to master in a serious match. Using these attacks properly requires memorization and a feel for the flow of battle. You need to know how fast you can get up to your opponent with the Ascension Jump, and time your attacks accordingly while you're protecting the defensive pushes while not getting caught by a shielded reflector. Overall, these abilities give Mewtwo a bit of unpredictability and overall make him a much harder target to take on in a one-on-one fight. Since you know all about Mewtwo's moveset, his tools, his advanced options, and more survival tactics, let's move into the final segment and give Mewtwo his final assessment. Mewtwo is a glass cannon who can dominate a defensive game with its incredible variety in tools, including a reflector, stun attack, and a powerful projectile. This character can destroy any reckless player, but may struggle if you can't out-predict your opponent. On top of that, Mewtwo is incredibly light and survivability is low. However, Mewtwo's strengths do outweigh his cons, and with that, Mewtwo is around a mid-tier character. Mewtwo may be a character that's incredibly difficult to play as to its full effectiveness, but it's definitely worth the payoff you get from doing so. He isn't a character that can afford to be reckless, and his overall playstyle is definitely a niche playstyle compared to characters like Shaky and Pikachu. And while he isn't as strong in the neutral game as he was in Melee, he can still be a fantastic character. and definitely isn't anywhere near as bad as his melee counterpart or people make him out to be. For buffs, the most I can recommend is a slight weight improvement, but that's pretty much it. Mewtwo's tools are so strong as of now, there's really no need for any more buffs aside from a slight weight buff. I think making him as heavy as a character like Meta Knight is just fine. And when it comes to Smash Brothers, Mewtwo truly does strike back. Thanks for watching! If you're interested in more guides, you can find my first 2 guides for Super Smash Bros. Ryu right here. On the right, you can check out my guide for King Deity, everyone's favorite penguin tyrant, and on the left you can check out a guide on the underdog of Smash Bros. Little Mac. Also, click the hammer space logo at the bottom to jump to the main page, and be sure to subscribe for more in the future. I've been Felicia Manful for 4, and I'll see you all next time for episode 4 of Underbrawl. Thank you very much for watching.